Today we've got an enthusiast DSLR from Pentax called the K-50. Let's see how Pentax makes this one stand out from the crowd. Hi, I'm Larry Becker, and today I've got one of the most colorful DSLRs on the market. It's the Pentax K-50. It's a 16 megapixel APS-C CMOS sensor equipped camera, and the kit that I'm using comes with an 18 to 135 millimeter f3.5 to 5.6 zoom lens. While the camera I tested is a traditional black, the body is also available in dozens and dozens of various color combinations. Now at first I thought all these colors were kind of silly until I spotted a combination that I'd love to have for myself. You know, maybe Pentax is onto something here. You can even change the color scheme of your display and menus. Still, colors don't mean anything if the camera doesn't perform, so let's have a look at the features and performance. The feel and weight of this camera are very nice. The grip is good, and all the controls, buttons, and dials are well placed, and they have a quality feel. The menus are intuitive, and the info screens make sense too. There are just a few things that you might need to look up in the manual. The ISO range is 100 to an impressive 51,200, but I saw noise at around 1,600, and I'd probably never shoot beyond ISO 3,200 myself. Anything above that is pretty darn noisy. The image quality is nearly on par with other 16 megapixel cameras in this class, maybe just a little bit noisier, and with the fast, accurate focusing and the 6 frames a second burst rate, this camera performs really well for things enthusiasts might want it to do. For the record, there are 11 phase detection type AF focus points, so the autofocus really is quick. Another real standout feature is that Pentax has a reputation for good weather sealing of camera bodies like this one, along with the WR designation referring to the weather resistance available with many of their current lenses, again like this lens that I was using. And if weather resistance is important to you, this is one of the strongest contenders in this class of cameras. Although the K-50 comes with a rechargeable lithium-ion battery, using an optional DBH109 battery holder, you can also use 4 AA batteries, including rechargeable nickel metal hydrides, which many of us already have on hand for use with our small flashes. I'm used to seeing a red or a white focus assist light, so the K-50 kind of surprised me with its green illuminator light, and keeping with that green theme, there's a green dot button right by the shutter. It's actually called the green button, and the manual says that it's used to, and I'm quoting here, reset the values being adjusted. But until you start using the camera in lots of different ways, that description doesn't really tell you much about what it does. For instance, in the programmed auto shooting mode, if you adjust the aperture or shutter speed, pressing that green button quickly resets those values back to their default. Shooters familiar with other brands of DSLRs will likely be familiar with what I just mentioned, programmed auto mode, as well as aperture priority, shutter priority, and manual mode. The K-50 also has a sensitivity priority that gives priority to the ISO, and then something they call TAV, which is shutter and aperture priority combined, but which still takes advantage of auto ISO. A note in the camera manual says that if you set the mode dial position to manual mode and you have auto ISO on, it's going to behave as though it was in the TAV mode. But I kind of wish that manual mode would just turn off auto ISO altogether. For pros, there are custom mode dial positions labeled U1 and U2 so that you can set everything just the way that you want it. There's a movie mode, and for amateurs there's a full auto mode, as well as a scene mode where you have access to 19 scene presets like portraits, sports, landscapes, and more. When you're checking out camera settings, you'll use the well laid out status screen. Many of the things displayed there have their own dedicated button like ISO, white balance, exposure compensation, and so on. So you can adjust them without a special trip to the menus. But if there's something on the display screen that you want to adjust and you don't see a dedicated button, That's no problem. Just press the info button on the bottom right of the LCD, and you'll be able to make changes to those additional settings like file size or type, custom image processing, metering, autofocus, and more. With all DSLRs, my preference is to shoot camera RAW files rather than JPEGs so that I can process them right away if I want to. The great news for me is that Pentax uses the DNG open standard. So even though this camera is brand new, I didn't have to wait for an update to Adobe Camera Raw in order to access the files. As for the onboard JPEG processing, there are a handful of presets, and you even have the option to fine-tune parameters within those presets. The default is bright, but I'd recommend that you test out each of the main options and see which one makes the JPEGs look good to you. Whether or not you prefer the bright setting, at least you know that you're not stuck with it for all your JPEG processing. And while we're talking about onboard image processing, you might want to try out the HDR option. Or, if you're a bit more advanced, the K-50 will let you shoot exposure bracketed sets of images for your own HDR post-processing. As you look on top of the camera near the shutter button, you'll see that there's an exposure compensation button. But you should know that there's also a flash exposure compensation feature so that you can boost or lower the power of that built-in flash. The video capabilities of the K-50 look good on paper. Some specs even look great. But the video performance isn't quite as awesome as you might think at first. First off, you can shoot 1080p HD at 30 frames a second or 720p at 60 frames a second. That's good. And depending on your movie mode settings, you can adjust things like exposure compensation, aperture, shutter speed, or ISO during filming. And that sounds great. And this 18 to 135 millimeter lens has an onboard DC motor that quickly and very quietly autofocuses during filming. It's a nice lens, and I really like it for stills and video, so that's great too. But unfortunately, you're stuck with the onboard mono mic for all your audio. There's no option for an external audio source, and for pro videographers, that's going to be a deal breaker unless you're willing to record audio on a separate device. Also, the video does show some rolling shutter, and while the video was sharp, it was so sharp I noticed a little bit of moire. So in the end, the video will be just fine for informal movie capture, but pros are probably going to look somewhere else. Besides that nice 18 to 135 millimeter lens, I also got to try out a 50 millimeter f1.8 lens. It was great for capturing shallow depth of field. So with the fact that it's essentially a 75 millimeter equivalent lens, it's nice for portraits. I liked the shots I was able to capture. The only strange thing is that the focus motor was surprisingly noisy. It sounds like a cordless drill. Just to be clear, the 18 to 135 was practically silent, but this 50 millimeter lens will attract attention if you're autofocusing in a quiet environment. One feature I wish this camera had is a proximity sensor, so that the rear screen would go off when you put the camera to your eye for shooting. In low light environments, it's distracting to have the info screen glaring in your peripheral vision while you're framing up a shot. It goes away as soon as you press the shutter halfway, but I don't want to have to press the shutter button halfway every time I want to turn off that rear screen. So I tried changing the screen settings and I turned it off altogether. The problem with that is that there are times when I still want to check the information on the info screen, and there's no way to see it temporarily. You have to go back and turn it on manually. Overall, the Pentax K-50 is a good enthusiast DSLR camera, and with its weather sealing, the quick focus system, and nice burst rate, it's sure to be responsible for grabbing some great shots. And if you just won't rest until you get a DSLR in your school colors, swing by the B&H site and spend some time scrolling through the pages of available K-50 color combinations. For B&H and Kelby Training, I'm Larry Becker. Thanks for watching.
Whether you're a hobbyist or a professional, B&H has the answers to your questions. Experience a world of technology at our New York City Superstore. Connect with us online or give us a call. Our staff of experts is happy to help.
Scott Kelby here, and welcome to this quick tour of our online training. We have hundreds of online classes for you, covering everything from lighting to landscape photography. From portrait photography to sports, we have classes on wedding, automotive photography, shooting, food, fashion, travel, you name it. The most incredible part of this is the price. You get all of this for just $199 a year, or you can pay monthly for just $24.95. 24-hour a day, 7-day-a-week access from anywhere in the world. I invite you to join with us today and start learning right now.